You're listening to the Jaybird Watching Podcast, the official podcast of jaysjournal.com and fansided.com. We are the official ballroom chat for everything Toronto Blue Jays baseball, from game highlights to rumors and all the stuff in between. Here's your host, Craig Borden, with co-hosts Jason Lyons and Liz McGuire. Now let's talk some Toronto Blue Jays baseball.
Hi, Blue Jays fans, and welcome to another week of the Jaybird Watching Podcast. I am your host, Craig Borden, with you. As always, we have Jason Lyons and Liz McGuire, and a special guest that we'll get to very shortly. But Liz, Jason, how the heck are you?
I'm pretty good. I was just fussing about the weather, and I daily stress about when Vladdy's going to get extended. I'm scared. There's like a date pending where it's like spring training was one of my favorite days where I was like, I can see spring. But now it's like the day where if they do not sign Vladdy or extend him, he goes to free agency. So I'm scared buds.
As of today, Mets fans are foaming at the mouth, according to ESPN. So there's that. But Jason, your turn, buddy. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Beautiful weather here in Vancouver today. Started out a little sketch, but it's really turned into a beautiful sort of fall feeling afternoon, not winter, which is great. I mean, there's lots of baseball talk, which is amazing. Alonso entering the ring of death, Vladdy, a few other guys. And one of the big things I wanted to just talk about quickly before we get going is obviously with stuff going on in California, there's a lot that and I mean, this may be a small part of it, but there's a lot of sports fields and sports activities that have been taken down by this. Easton and Rawlings have a thing on Instagram. If you go look it up, if you've got old gear that's just sitting around your garage doing nothing, package that stuff up and send it down there. There's a link on the two Instagrams. If it gets to a kid and allows him to get playing baseball a little bit faster, or just, ease the pain of what's going on down there, I think it's something we should, definitely get behind. So if you can, check it out on Instagram, both Rawlings and Easton.
Stop. And with us tonight, the one, the only Travis Snider. How are we doing, my friend? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing good. Hearing that intro, I got a few bats in my garage that I need to get boxed up and sent down there. That's great share.
That is awesome. Yeah, they would be one of many baseball players that have been getting golf things set up too. I was reading something that Hunter Green's donating like a bunch of cleats that he's been buying up from stores and stuff like that too. So that's really cool. So Travis, we wanted to talk obviously with you about your baseball career and the wonderful work you've been doing post your major league career. But first things first, we wanted to talk a unfortunate thing outside of what Jason was just mentioning, that unfortunately baseball world lost Bob Uecker today at the age of 90. One way or the other, every baseball fan has something that they have been touched on by this fact of this man, and to that point, tip of the hat. I'm a big fan of, I think he has easily the best Hall of Fame speech for Major League Baseball in all history, because it was a self-roast. I think he started the actual bit for his Hall of Fame speech by saying no sour grapes or nothing, but I think I should have went in as a player.
The guy's an absolute beauty.
Travis,
the treasure.
There he is. So Travis, I didn't know if you had that one moment that stood out to you from Bob Uecker's extended career and obviously around baseball.
I mean, the movies are the thing that stands out the most for me, and then getting to see him on the field pregame. I don't have any great Bob Uecker stories that I could share, other than I admired somebody who took his career playing experience and really leveraged that into humor. And that gave him a lot of the personality that drew people into how difficult the game of baseball can be. But when you got somebody as talented as him behind the microphone, who's able to weave in those stories and really share the personal experiences with the humor and make it all humanized, right? Which I think, as I've retired from playing baseball, people who can humanize the experience of being a human being playing professional sports, I really am drawn to that. So I tip my cap to Bob and everything he did for the world of broadcasting and baseball movies that so many of us watched growing up as kids, that just will be with us forever.
Jason, you had something clearly to add to that.
Just think about the amount of Eucharisms that there are out there, that all you have to do is say it. Like, you could walk and you say it and 15 heads will turn and they immediately, like, just a bit outside. Like, that will stick around forever and people will never not say it when they see a bad pitch. The whole thing. he made Major League what it was. It would not be as funny and as great of a movie without him. And then just to be the lovable loser that he was and embrace that, and sort of, just like I was watching some of the old Bud Light commercials, like the one where he thinks he's getting moved to a VIP and they put him like in the top. And then they show other clips of guys like sitting way up in the seat, and they're like, that guy's in the euchre seat. Like, I mean, it's funny that it had that kind of an impact for, like Travis said, for a guy who didn't play, very much or very well. He still did play though, so he's but it's tough to watch some of those guys go, and it's we know it's coming. It's as we get older, it's just going to compound. But he'll be missed and live on dearly in my many watchings of Major League for the rest of my life.
So do you know the cheap seat story, or at least what Bud Selig did to him in recent years? He's the only Milwaukee Brewer that actually has 2 statues at I forget the name now, but Miller Park. There's a statue of him literally kind of like Walt Disney at Disney World, welcome you into the ballpark. And then there's one in a very, very chosen particular place that I visited, and that's actually where my profile pic is from and everything like that from my travels. And when they unveiled it to him, they had everybody on the field behind the pitcher's mound looking toward home plate. And then they pull out the Jumbotron, on the sheet off of it. And he's like doing this because he didn't know where it was. And then Bud Selig pops up about like right here, and he goes, dude, it's all the way up there. It was 100% the last row of the stadium behind home plate per that commercial you were talking about, Jason. The nosebleed seat. Liz, do you have anything you want to mention to that?
I think the story that resonated with me the most, I mean, yeah, Major League, but he like apparently like played the tuba and just like shagged balls during a World Series at the same time, and that's beautiful.
It's fun, but I think that speaks to that concept of the human part that Travis was mentioning. So anyway, tip of the hat.
I was going to say, I think what people get a chance to see is that playful attitude a lot of us have as players, and you see the pranks that guys like to pull on each other, and the amount of humor it takes to kind of build that continuity of a clubhouse and how you find ways to make things fun and pick at each other. Those are the things I miss about not being in baseball anymore, is you don't get to go to the clubhouse and mess with somebody on a daily basis.
There is a little bit to that. And it's like you were rereading the comments sections on all of our fun on the social media that we saw that you were having fun with too. And but there was one particular question that came up on there, and I think this will be a nice segue into talking about your baseball career and your baseball experience. Were there any of those weird pranks or anything in the midst of that either you helped in or you witnessed while you were in any of the clubhouses that were like, oh, they got him good kind of like thing?
Yeah, I mean, I like to poke at the veteran guys. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is I had to dress up as a rookie 3 years, even though I was a rookie for, you could say, 2. And I just kept asking Vernon Wells, hey man, what am I going to have to dress up this year? And if I would have just kept my mouth shut and didn't mess with him and Aaron Hill and some of the vets as much as I did, I wouldn't have had to dress up for a third time. So yeah, I mean, those are those little things that make the looking back on your career and the relationships that you get to share with people. I also, this is in AAA, but I gave guys from Texas a hard time. Being from Washington, we don't get the respect that we deserve. A lot like Canada, because we're away from the southern states where it's nice weather all the time, and they're just think they're better at everything. So I gave a lot of guys that were Texas born a lot of trash while we were playing together in Round Rock. And I came in one day and my entire locker had been decorated from Cowboys to the Rangers to all the different Texas things. I had boots, I had spurs. So I ended up going out for batting practice with some tight Wranglers and some, I won't use the word, but the boots and the spurs and all that, and went to BP and just try and embrace that moment. And I ended up getting the guys back later, but I won't share what I did because it's not really appropriate.
There's some children in the seats like we were talking about. Yeah. So if you are all out there listening in on the cheap seats, the comments are fully live and everything. So make sure you ask those questions. If you were one of the ones that did submit some stuff on social media before the show, we're happy to listen. So on that note, Travis, you did get the pleasure of obviously growing up in Washington, you became the major league player, you got drafted, and you had a very good major league career. And we, as Blue Jays fans, enjoyed having you for the beginning of your career. And just, it seemed like I mentioned, we had a lot of youngsters that listen to this show. Is there anything you can allude to in the midst of that, growing up in Washington, like you mentioned, moving into the majors and getting drafted, how that kind of all transpired?
Yeah, I look at it from two sides. It was a storybook youth baseball experience for me. I got to play with a core group of my best friends from Little League all the way through our high school state championship our senior year. So the experiences and the memories that kids that are listening that you're going through right now, those are the ones, as cool as it was to play in the major leagues and have some of these stories I've shared, the relationships that I developed during that time, the amount of parents that became second parents to me and mentors through my ups and my downs through baseball and through life. I think really understanding we all want to grow up and achieve this goal of maybe playing in high school or playing at the next level. But I think just being where your feet are, as Clint Hurdle would say, and really enjoying the opportunity that you get to go out with your best friends and go and compete on a field and play a game that you love. And through all of that, I want to convey the message of kind of what I focus on now is that identity. For the kids who are listening and even the parents, the hardest thing to do is be a parent and watch the thing you love the most run around out there on the field where you have no control. For the kids that are listening, don't tie your identity to your success in sports or in business or whatever it is you want to pursue. Be the person you are, grow, and allow sports and the experiences you have in life help teach you about yourself, but don't ever sell out to just be a hockey player or a baseball player, because that's not really what's going to fulfill you when you get old and you understand how these things can affect you in a negative way.
That's an awesome piece of advice. It sounds like you might have hung out with our friend that was from last week's show. We had Jay Jackson on the show last week, and he said he had the pleasure of playing with you in Pittsburgh, he thinks.
Yep, and then we reconnected in it was, I think, Vegas. We were there, or Scottsdale, for the Alumni Association. He was still playing, but he came down for our career development summit. So I got a chance to hang out with him and then, see what he had to deal with. I think it was last year during the season, right, with the baby and everything. So my hat off to Jay. He's a great dude. He's endured a lot throughout his career. He's been through the ups and downs and through the meat grinder and has come out and really carved out a nice career and has a great message to share.
Hey, Travis. One of the things that we get asked, or I get asked a lot, and it's something that comes from the kids as well, is when you were coming up, obviously you were from Kirkland, but did you move down to California after that?
No, I grew up just north of Kirkland. So the hospital was Kirkland, born and raised just north of Seattle. So stayed this area until I got drafted. And
you guys went to the Little League World Series, correct?
We did not. So we went to the Western Regionals. Back then, we didn't have the Northwest and West. We won the state championship when we were 9 and 11. We took second when we were 10 and 12. So we were very competitive in terms of Little League All-Star Baseball. But we ended up getting bounced by Southern California and Hawaii in that Western Regional tournament, which, again, was really cool for us to get to go down to California and go to Disneyland and have that experience. But I've also shared that was, the first time I ever had a panic attack playing on the field, and realizing at that age, right, as we're parents going through this and parents that are listening, it's a lot of pressure, right? It's a lot of pressure for kids, especially when those expectations start to build. And I think for all of us as the adults to take that step back and recognize what it is and what we should be celebrating through this process, and making sure that early success doesn't turn into that identity formation that I was talking about before.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going with this. When you were starting to get 15, 16 in that sort of wheelhouse, because you played football as well, right?
Yeah.
When did you kind of say, all right, baseball is going to be the way I'm going to go? And when you did do that, did you continue to train the other sports, or did you go to, I don't know where you went to university. I was about a busy week for what you did. And I just want, because the kids right now, like what they're dealing with is they're now starting to get letters, the older group of kids, and they're trying to determine whether it's a JUCO, whether they hold out and go to a bigger school, small fish, big pond. What was your take on sort of the post Little League moving into high school ball, then moving into college ball?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I played football and baseball, wanted to play football and baseball in college, had some early letters for football from Ivy League and Pac-12, Pac-10 schools, I guess, at the time. And that was because I played varsity as a freshman. So I was a bigger, stronger, basically the same size I am now. So my experience on the football field was much different than most freshmen or sophomores. The thing that ended my career was a fractured ankle after my sophomore season. It was during the spring. So I ended up having surgery. I missed that summer of baseball my sophomore year and had a chance to go to the area codes and things that I just wasn't able to take advantage of. And during that time, I rehabbed and I got back for fall baseball, played for the Mariner Scout team. And that's really where the professional attention started to pick up. And as I went into my junior year and had a opportunity to play football, but was not healthy or cleared medically to play, I was still holding on to that dream. Missed the season by one practice and was not able to participate as a junior. So then the junior summers where things really took off, and that's where the draft was clearly going to be an option for me. And the conversations that I had with the scouts was, if you have another surgery, you're not going to be a first or a second or a third round pick. So it was at that point where I had to make that decision that baseball was my passion. I didn't want to risk my future in baseball from getting hurt in football. And that's ultimately why I had to make one of the hardest decisions I had made up until that point in my life. So my advice to kids listening is continue to play as many sports as you can, as long as you can. But understand you're starting to reach a point at 15, 16, 17 years old where I'm not somebody who believes that you should play a sport year round all the time. Even us athletes take a good 2, 4, 6 weeks off, depending on what it is we're training and how we're training it. And understanding how the other sports help you develop the skills that make you better in the sports that you play. So I think we want to specialize kids at a young age and say he's a baseball player, he's got to play baseball year round, or hockey or whatever sport. I'm somebody who is always going to be on the side of let's let kids be kids. Let's let them play sports. As they get older and they get serious and they say, Mom or Dad, I really want to pursue this opportunity at university or at a junior college or whatever it is in whatever sport, then it becomes helping them understand what it takes to get there. But really, the kids who are listening, you got to want that. Like, your parents can't tell you, your coaches can't tell you, you have to want that. And I think for the parents and coaches listening, they have to show that internal drive. And as much as we can help guide them and find ways to push and pull, it really is an internal motivation for these kids that they got to want it, and they got to be willing to do the things that other kids aren't willing to do. And that's not just quitting a sport. I think it's more of the extra work that goes into developing the skill sets that you are trying to get better at to make yourself a more complete player.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, it's I find it so interesting. Like I said, we've done a lot of this. I don't know if you remember Brandon Geyer, who played in the league for a while. He reached out to us, and then we're fortunate enough here in Vancouver to have Dong Lean, who was the physical coach for the Phillies for about 15 years. He's around and he coaches our kids. He's a great dude. And one of the things that I was looking at throughout the 3A stuff, and I think this is something that's super important and doesn't get talked about enough, is journaling. You guys are big proponents of it. I'm a big proponent of it. I know it's hard for kids to journal. It's tough. We've got, like, just as an example tonight, like, I have one kid going to a basketball practice, one kid going to a baseball practice, and then both going somewhere else after that. Speak a little bit to the importance that you guys see. We just went through this with our kids last night about putting your goals down on paper and actually having them there, and they realize the importance of it afterwards. But just talk to the people about where you see this importance, not only in kids, but I mean, we should be doing it too as adults.
Yeah, I think everybody's first instinct is, do you have an app, or is there a technological way to accomplish that? And that's something, as we grow and evolve as a company, we'll look to offer. But I think first and foremost, writing something down on paper, there's something therapeutic about that, getting it out on paper and being able to actually visually see it. The premise behind our journal is really focused on identity, conscious and subconscious mind, mindset, triggers, your parent relationship, and your coach. So it's much less performance driven in the goals I'm going to set to hit this many home runs or have this type of batting average. It's much more about creating introspection for kids and making them more self-aware and becoming more emotionally intelligent of what they deal with on an individual basis, and how each of us carries these things in our conscious and subconscious mind. And those things get triggered by certain events that can lead to an emotional response that it makes it hard for us to be athletes. And that's something that I talk a lot about, is my struggles mentally, where people always ask, do you think you're rushed? Do you think you're rushed? I think, yeah, on some hand, you could argue that I was rushed, but at the same time, my emotional intelligence at that time, I had convinced everybody around me I was much smarter than I was, and I was this old soul. But then when these things really came and punched me in the mouth for the first time, and I realized like my identity of who I was tied to my performance on the field, not who I am is what I bring to the field and how I play the game. And I think that's where I caution parents, I caution kids as you're going through this process. It sucks because sports and life are stat driven. It's data driven. It's a performance based industry. But at the same time, you hear process over outcome all the time, whether it's in business or in sports. And I think we're trying to outline through our journaling process this emotional map for kids to understand, where are those growth areas? Where are those emotional things that are coming up for me? And how do I start to work through this, becoming aware of it's one step and then working through it so that you can use those past experiences and leverage those as experience moving into that next challenge that you're going to face.
Travis, when you were playing, was it like stigmatized to talk about mental health? Like when you were having challenges, were you open to talk about it, or were you like, pressured to keep it in?
I think early in my career, we had a very veteran team, and that was kind of the last wave, the really old school. And when you think about generations, right, we think about our parents and our parents' parents and how life and social and culturally we've evolved. But at the time, it was kind of at the tail end of just be a man, suck it up and play. And it's not like I felt like any of those vets that supported me through my ups and downs were ever judging me, but there were always the comments, oh, the head doctor's in town, if it's the guy that everybody's going to talk to. And I was one of those guys that through some poor choices off the field, it kind of landed me into the program where I was like, okay, we got to really, Blue Jays did everything they could to support me through some of the things I was dealing with in my personal life, along with on the field struggles that I had. As I went through the Pittsburgh Pirate experience, they were really focused on this piece, and that was a big shift going there. It was just kind of the culture was built in. Clint Hurdle's a very outspoken person about his career experiences, his ups and downs. And so it was much more of the norm there to have that already kind of put into the program, and then to be able to break off and do the one-on-one stuff. And that's really where I got into journaling. I sat down with the head mental performance coach at the time, and we put together a journal that was really focused on the performance. But I think ultimately what journaling does is it's an opportunity to recognize patterns. And those were things that I didn't realize, a bad round of batting practice would lead into an 0 for 3 or an 0 for 4 game, almost guaranteed, just because of the mindset and the emotional attachment I had to having to have a perfect swing or a perfect round of batting practice to feel like I could go and hit the game. And then you start to recognize these traps you set for yourself as an athlete and as a human. I think that's where we talk about journaling outside of just baseball or sports, is really we're all wired from this place of operating from our subconscious, and we don't recognize how some of these things are just the software that's been downloaded over the course of life that we've had these experiences. We start to do things on autopilot, and some of those things are great habits that we've created, and some of them are just habits we're not aware of. So that was really the eye-opening experience for me, and where journaling had a major impact on my career. It didn't solve all of my problems, right? But it started to bring some things to the surface, where as I got towards the end of my career and had worked with, a number of departments and a number of different organizations that I had been with, I recognized that the depth that I needed to go to at the end of my career was not something that was just a sports psychology problem. And since then, I've been diagnosed with complex PTSD, and starting to unpack how my childhood experiences really impact the way that I operated as a player, as a person, as a husband, as a father. And I think those are things that with our company and the idea of journaling is we're really trying to get kids thinking about this stuff early on, before they get into the college experience, before they get into what are you going to be when you grow up, and how hard that question is for kids to answer, especially when you're asking them at 15, 16 years old, do you want to go be a baseball player? It's like, yeah, that sounds great, but is it really your dream, or is it just a fantasy? And what is the difference between that?
Yeah. Or are you just really good at it? And that's the path you see right now based on that. I mean, we see lots of number one picks in all sports, burnout, tailspin, all the rest of this stuff. One of the other things that sort of I'm a big proponent of it, and I had to learn this the hard way, being a parent and a coach. And as my wife and other people might refer to me as a bit of a hard ass. I'm okay with that, and I feel like I learned a lot. One of the things I wanted you to sort of touch on, and I don't think again we talk about this enough, is the car ride home and how parents can try to train themselves to, like the switch that we made was, rather than me going ballistic or however I felt I was going to go in the car and make it so that it was just a nightmare. I've learned now that if I ask the boys, whatever sport they're doing, to tell me 3 positives and 1 negative, it just completely changes the narrative. And so, I've listened to some, and for the guys and people that are out there listening, and there's lots of you out there, we can see you. Please go check out Travis's stuff on YouTube and everywhere else. And it's impactful, and it's a different way than I've seen a lot of it presented by, everybody. We've had a number of mental discussions, but how do you address the parents? Like like if you were to ever have a group of parents, or do you guys ever look at that as being part of the next evolution of not just talking to the kids, talking to the parents about how the expectations have to be?
Yeah. So we started, my partner had written this guidebook for parents that's titled Hero, and it is the parent guidebook. And it is is really our main focus, is we want to get the parents to understand a couple of things you talked about that I want to highlight. One, past experiences. How you experience sports with your parents as a child is going to have an impact on how you raise your child. Doesn't mean it's going to be all bad or all good. That's the first exercise that we take parents through and say, how are these things showing up in the way that you parent your child? You mentioned being a hard ass, right? I'm sure you were coached and raised in a generation where you really resonated to, or you learned a lot from coaches who had that type of tone and had that type of approach. Now, you also alluded to that doesn't really work as a parent on the car ride home, right? And being a parent and being a coach at the same time is probably the most difficult job that's out there, especially in youth sports, because you're dealing with your own kid who's maybe 7 or 10, and they'd want to just mess around with their buddies and be defiant because you're dad and not coach. And that's a really tough line for parents to navigate as parents and coaches. But back to the parents, the other piece of this, right, is understanding the emotions that we experience while we watch our children play, right? Whether it's your son or daughter making a great play or an error, how we react to that in the moment is a product of the emotions and thoughts that are taking place. So we're not even conscious of these things, but we snap and we say something like, hey, get your glove down, or don't swing at that pitch, or throw a strike, or whatever it is that comes out of our mouth as parents, because A, we're a little bit crazy because we care more about these things than anything in the world. And B, we have zero control over what's actually happening on the field. It's just like a coach does everything they can do to prepare a team. And then when the game starts, you really don't have that much ability to stand in the box or throw a pitch for somebody. So it's totally out of your control. And I think we're trying to humanize that, right? And really raise the awareness to how difficult that is from an emotional standpoint for us as adults who, when it's all said and done, we should be the ones that are modeling that behavior for the kids, right? Of how to stay calm when things get crazy and how to deal with the failure and adversity that sports and life are going to bring. I think that's where we're really working with parents through that guidebook, is to understand in that first section of your child, what are you bringing into this? What is your experience actually like? Because you might sit there and say, oh, I see that crazy dad in the stands that just wears his kids out after every play that they make a mistake on. And I'm not that parent, so I feel pretty good about myself. And then you might see the parent who just kind of sits there and doesn't say anything. Maybe they look at their phone, they're totally checked out. And you're like, okay, I'm not that parent either. But what we're challenging parents to do is really say, could we all get a little bit better, 10, 20, 30% better? Just like we ask our athletes to every time they show up to the field or every time they show up to practice, what is the process that we're working through as parents to come alongside those kids and say, hey, I'm not a finished product. I'm never going to be. I want to be a better parent to my child. I want my kid to have more of this built-in support and communication without the emotions that come up for us when we watch our kids struggle. Because I don't think there's anything harder than watching your kids suck at something. Excuse my language, but it's a tough thing as a parent. And it's also, if we zoom out and we take that 10,000 foot view and we're like, oh, that's how you learn how to do something. And if we create and we cultivate a relationship with failure that is nothing more than learning, instead of shame and anger, which I know you can relate to being a hard ass coach, shame and anger were a big fuel for us when we were being coached by these coaches. And sometimes that becomes right. And that becomes And it's the internal
But you won't
voice.
do that again.
Yeah, which it's the internal voice, that the critic, right? That as parents, we're creating that voice inside of our child's head based off of our feedback. And I think it's a really deep thing that gets completely overlooked in the $1 billion industry that youth sports is, with all the training and all the things that are available to parents. We're trying to find our way into that space to come alongside parents and say, hey, this is really hard. I'm a parent. I make mistakes at this too. That's a big reason why I'm doing this, because I recognized early on that if I come at my son like I would talk to a professional athlete, it's not going to vibe, right? And if I want to correct every mistake every time I play catch with my son, that's not going to feel very safe, especially at 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, where they're just out there. They just want to play with mom and dad. And that's where we're trying to get very specific in different age groups and developmental processes. So we understand, like, yeah, is it great that your son's really good at baseball or hockey when they're 8 years old? But if we're not aware of our emotions that come alongside of that and be able to regulate that in a way where we're not starting to put that pressure on little Timmy or little Susie to be the greatest NHL player of all time. They're 8 years old, guys. We got to take that step back and put it in perspective.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've seen over and over again, and I talk about this ad nauseum, is, like, how much time do you spend working out on your physical body? I would say, maybe 95%. And if you can squeeze 5% of mental in, but I mean, the game is the complete opposite way around almost. Like, it's 80 mental, 20 physical. And when people start,
you're not getting your yogiisms right here at all, Jason. The game's what, 80% mental and 40%
80% mental, 80% physical. I find it so interesting. And I mean, like that's why, when we were sort of hyping this show up, I mean, this is the big part. I mean, we're going to get silly and talk about, some of the fun stuff, and, obviously which is great, because Craig opened up the can of worms, which is we've now found out you're a bit of a prankster in the Dougie. So, I mean, and in the clubhouse. So, I mean, Craig loves that crap. So
I'm a comedian of my own. I'm a cartoon character in a former shitty baseball player's body. That's just how it is.
There we go.
So,
Travis, I have a question. What's it? How do you not get lost in the numbers? Right? Like, you're like how do you do that?
I don't think there's a one word or one sentence answer to that. And as you guys know, I'm not very short-winded, but perspective is everything. And when you attach your emotions to your batting average or your home run total or your goal count or your assist or whatever stats it is, right, then it becomes something that feels more like love lost and love gained, instead of a product of hard work and continual grinding of what do I need to do to get better each and every day to achieve this long-term goal. For me, when I came into baseball, is to be a Hall of Fame baseball player. Quickly did I realize that just staying in the big leagues was going to be really difficult for me, because the expectations that come with a high level of performance, or the expectation of I have to achieve this to be able to go here, we get lost in trying to predict the future, and our ego wants to attach to those stats and those goals, we'll call them, and not understand that what it really takes to be great at something is, number one, you got to have the resilience and the grind to go deeper and go harder and go faster and stronger than everybody else that's really trying to accomplish the same thing that you are, but then trying to find that balance of not tying your whole identity to that. That was a really tough thing for me, because it was all or nothing, and I didn't know how to kind of switch gears when things needed to be non-baseball. I really, for early in my career, I'd never wanted to talk about baseball away from the field, because I was just so overwhelmed with the amount of conversation and being the focal point of that conversation. I just wanted, like, the spotlight to be off me. As you're going through your youth career, it's tough when you're having success not to understand, especially in today's age where there's player rankings, state rankings, everybody's, can see your stats online. I think it's just managing expectations and understanding how the expectation of performance can take you away and outside of your own athletic ability to just go and focus on what you need to do every single day. So it's that cliche, we're just going to take it one day at a time. But that's really, when you hear that from players who you can just see are in this process constantly and not chasing the end goal, but understanding that has to be part of the process of just staying in the moment.
And Liz, I think you remember we had Finn and Xander on. So Finn is a perfect example of what Travis is talking about. Finn blew his ACL 1 year, rehabbed, got ready to go, blew his MCL out the next year, rehabbed, ready to go. And in that process, injured his elbow and then had a massive collision with another player that put him out. So he basically missed 2 of his prime years of being a top level. We don't have high school baseball in Canada,
youngster,
but it would be what would be considered to be the highest level of baseball we can play up here. And he came back from all of that, no stats, no nothing. He asked for a tryout, got one, and he's playing for Canada's national team. Like, I mean,
That's
it's
awesome.
Some people worry, like you say, Travis, some people micro worry about, this home runs, batting average, all this other stuff. And it's, if you just start to take the sum of the parts, you just have such a better chance of having a good day. It's not concentrating on yesterday. You can't look too far in the future, but you can't let those numbers dictate who you are.
Exactly. And just to be this person, because we have a wonderful 150 people live right now, and they're chiming in all over the place. But I got one here from Michael Borland that I got to mention because he's always one of our frequents. Baseball's a game of failure. The Hall of Fame best of the best baseball players get a hit a third of the time. Wrap your mind around that one. So
it might be 1 out of 4 here with the way hitting's trended over the last 10 years. I mean, these pitchers are getting tough, man.
Yeah. And then getting to that point, a third of those times you're probably just going to strike out now because of that gas that you were just mentioning.
Yeah, the game is definitely involved. That is for sure.
It was interesting to hear Travis talk about where we're starting to see a game of specialists, not only pitching. I mean, hitters, guys that are coming up and through, and they're like, you can't play a position. Well, I can go 4 for 4 and hit 3 out of here every game. So find me a spot. And, teams, even collegiate teams, are like, all right, well, we'll stick you somewhere. We'll take the errors, we'll take the whatever, because we know you can do it in the dish. When you were coming up, it was not that case. I mean, you had to be good at everything and be willing to, like, if you were like, well, I play outfield, and they're like, no, you don't, you play second base now. Talk about how the trials and tribulations of sort of showing up somewhere and, being the big dog in the yard for a long time, and you get there and they're like, bro, like you're not even close to the best outfielder we got here. So maybe try third, maybe try 2. Like, you know what I mean? Just the dynamics of the clubhouse, especially with a Jays team that was, pretty talented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think looking back to the early years in Toronto, I was a bat first prospect. There was the saying, if you can hit, you can play. And that's when I was still playing DH as well as some outfield. And some of the troubles or some of the struggles that I went through there was there was this affinity with how much I weighed. And I'm a bigger bodied guy. So when I made my debut, I was probably closer to 245. And at one point in my career, I was down to 219 and kind of everywhere in between. And you hear this every year in spring training. Oh, this guy's in the best shape of his life. It's going to be the best year ever. And those are those things that you don't recognize, like as an athlete coming into being the big dog and then going to be the small fish or the big fish in the small pond, and getting to the major leagues and realizing, okay, these guys are all better than me at different things. What are those areas that I need to continue and improve upon? I think for me, I really struggled with some of the feedback that I got, because it wasn't bad feedback in terms of what Cito and some of the staff was trying to get me to understand, whether it was as a hitter or as an outfielder. I worked my tail off all the way through the minor leagues and at the major league level to become an average major league outfielder. But I also snuck in before WAR and all of the defensive analytics really got in depth. So I don't know if I benefited from that. They did feel like they could stick me in center field. I made my debut in Cashman Field in Vegas, this massive this massive launch pad of a field down there, and then got to play a few games up in the show at center field, which if you would have told me that in high school, I probably would have laughed. So there was a lot of hard work that I had to put in. I think ultimately, just like anything, we got to find the areas of growth, right? The areas that we need to improve upon, and look at that with a curiosity instead of a judgment. And that's where my ego really struggled, because it was like, well, if I'm fat, I can hit bombs and I can hit 300, and I've done this throughout the minor leagues. But then you start to get under the microscope at that major league level, and maybe you're a step behind on catching a ball, or you're not stealing bases, or you're not adding value if you're not hitting. And I think that's the pressure when you're a DH or you're just a bat first guy, is if you're not hitting, which hitting's one of the hardest things, if not the hardest thing to do in sports. How are you going to contribute? And I think those are the things that really get magnified at that level. But then you see a guy like Juan Soto sign a $750 million deal, and most people would say he's not an above average or even an average outfielder. And I don't have an opinion on that, but like that's just the way, some things shake out. And I do think if you can rake, you can play. But any kid who's listening to this, like if you don't have a spot on the field, get good at 4 spots. If you're trying to get better at shortstop, be willing to put in the extra work to become the best shortstop you can be, and don't get lost in the comparison game.
That's really. I have to ask this one question, knowing that you were in that time frame where the Blue Jays had the oddity of playing their minor league seasons, obviously on the literal other side of the country in Las Vegas. So one of your teammates was Mike McCoy. How many frequent flyer miles do you think that gentleman had in the midst of that? Because he was always seemed like the first one called up, but he was also that 26th guy on the roster all the time. I like watching him play. I really did. But I felt bad for him being all the way like this all the time.
Yeah, Mike was actually my roommate that year, so we were roommates on the road, and we got to be really close. And it's a tough job. It's part of the deal. It's part of what we sign up for. It's part of the way the rosters are designed. I know that happens a lot with pitchers as well. And it's crazy, just the intricacies of can you pitch in 2 days? Okay, well, we got to send you out of here type of things that happen. So it's really the business reality that can punch players in the mouth. I think that really just shakes that pure, genuine love for playing the game. And it becomes business decisions that, again, when you get sent out to Vegas, you can look at it from 2 sides. Hey, I get to go to Vegas, or, oh man, I got to go to Vegas. Right. So for me, I know that first one was tough. I ended up flying home, which the team didn't like that, just because we get 48 hours if we need it. I took it. And that didn't really sit well with the leaders at the time. But at the same time, I showed up there ready to work and put everything into it that I had. It was just, as a young kid, that's a lot of emotions to try and process with the expectations that you have for yourself. And if you, like I was, listening to all these external expectations starting to creep in and feed my ego, it made it even harder to go through that.
Craig, don't you like how subtly that Travis just dropped in a Cito bomb? Like the name drop, the name drop of all this. Oh, just I was hanging out with Cito Gaston.
my son brought home, actually, from the library, Blue Jays book. So I was looking through it, and my older son looks at me, and he's 8. So he's like, "Dad, I hope you're not offended you're not in this book." I'm like, "Dude, don't worry. Joey Bats is in there. Edwin's in there. I got to ride those guys' coattail. I get to hang out with them." And then I was looking back at the Cito era, and I was like, when I was a player, I knew he played and managed and was a god in Toronto for what he did for the organization. But it was such an awkward situation for us because I was so emotionally unable to process and just hear what the message was. I just took everything personally, and I'm so glad I got a chance. I've seen Cito probably twice since I retired, and I just go give him a big hug and I say thank you, and I apologize because I know that there was this tension between him and I, and knowing his history in baseball in the city of Toronto, I don't think there's anybody in that position like Cito, and I think I'm really grateful that I've had a chance to reflect on all that and just kind of make amends. Not that there was a long-standing beef or I had problems with Cito, but there was a lot that was made out of it in the media. So any fan listening, I do love Cito, and that guy is a legend.
Respect.
What was have a legendary pitcher, I think, though, that should be in that book. Sorry, Liz, I'll get to you in 2 seconds. You have a walk-off that you have almost the full slam dunk motion with the hair and everything going. That should be in every Blue Jay book there is. But
it's beautiful.
I was actually getting sent down before that game. Alex Anthopoulos told me later, and then after the walk-off, they thought maybe something had clicked, so they stuck with me for a couple more weeks. But yeah, that I remember that one. That was a double in the gap off of somebody on the Yankees, and Ricky and the boys were out there to meet me, and you could tell there's a lot of pent-up emotion coming out in that moment.
Deal. Go, Liz.
How did Travis, when you when you got drafted by the Jays or you called up by the Jays, what were your thoughts of going to Canada? We hear that baseball players don't want to play in Canada or they don't know what it's about. What was your perception of going there, and how did you enjoy Toronto?
I probably had too much fun in Toronto, for being honest. Being young and being single in that city there was a lot of temptation and just a lot of people that I connected with while I was there that showed me such a great time, from the best steaks and the best food and private chefs. And just, I got to see the culture of the city. Obviously, from a Blue Jays perspective, it's probably, I don't know the right term, rose-tinted glasses, or maybe not the accurate description of what a normal person would go and get to do there. But I felt for me it was easier because I was young and single. I saw what the families, and as later in my career, once I had a family, there are some differences. I think bagged milk was one of the issues at the time with some of the vets that I would talk to. Is like, this is really weird that you guys keep your milk in a bag. When you think about customs, like that's the other thing. We definitely have expedited experience. I don't know how much it's changed since I traveled to and from Toronto with the team, but it's still a lot, you know what I mean, just to get your families back and forth. And I think that was my biggest regret, was not flying the boys out to Toronto. And a lot of it was this fear of, I'm going to get sent down, so the tickets are going to be worthless or whatever, right? There's just this fear I was playing in my head. But yeah, getting a chance to kind of grow up in that city and not realize how big of a city it is, and the fan base, not just being the city of Toronto, but the country of Canada, getting to go on some of the Jays tours and connect with people in Saskatoon and some of the other cities that we went to. We went to Vancouver, got to do the puck drop, or got to do something in between periods there with them. So I loved it. Getting a chance to be around the hockey culture too. I didn't grow up around that. So going to Leafs games, getting to meet some of the players, we got connected with a lot of the NHL guys down in Florida when we were in spring training. They'd be coming through playing teams, and we get to go to the Lightning games and meet Stamkos and the boys. And so it was really cool just to get a feel for the culture. I grew up, 2 hours from the border, so I've been to Canada before going to Toronto, but that experience for me, culturally speaking, I feel really lucky. I married a Mexican, so I get to spend a lot of time in Mexico, and then I got to play in Toronto. So I've got to cover North America and see what the beautiful country of Canada has to offer in the great city of Toronto.
Your line, "Meats don't clash," is legendary in the city. It has become legendary. Thank you.
Thank you.
I got to ask, Trav. So we're Lunchbox Hero, obviously, is your nickname. It's your handle on all your socials. Did you have that nickname prior to, like, is that something you've had for a long time? And did you ever have Foreigner as your walk-up song?
Foreigner, what's
Jukebox Hero?
No, yeah, I never had Jukebox Hero. Lunchbox was freshman year of high school, starting middle linebacker on the varsity team, 6 foot 225, just about where I'm at right now. Yeah, and played in the middle and led the team in tackles. And then I would hang out with the older kids, and ended up eating, $35 of Taco Bell one night. And they looked at me and they're like, "Yeah, you're the Lunchbox." So that's where Lunchbox started. And then the hero was actually AJ Burnett, former Blue Jay and Pirate teammate of mine. I'd hang out with AJ in spring training sometimes. And with the vets, and video games were still a big deal to me back then. So Guitar Hero was kind of my jam, that and Call of Duty. And so I'd be on playing with him and BJ Ryan or whatever else, and then go over to their house and they'd see me play the guitar. And I could do the expert thing. I never played a real guitar, but I was pretty nasty on the Guitar Hero version. So that's where Hero kind of came up. And so that was when I started Twitter. I was so scared because so many media members had asked me, "Do you have Twitter? Do you have Twitter?" And I'm just like, "What is Twitter?" And then I started to do a little investigating. I'm like, wait, I can get free food. My buddy got a free Xbox. Like, that was my whole motivation behind keeping it less about the baseball stuff, even though I've talked a lot about baseball and life and mental health, but really the original foodie, the original here's what I eat in a day post kind of guy that now all these people have copied and built their million followers on different Instagram and social channels. So I try and think of myself as a pioneer in the pictures of food game. And that was really what I built a lot of connection with my followers back then, was just having a chance to share all the ridiculous meals that I was eating and just the slabs of steaks when the boys would come over after a game or something.
So good.
And thank you for not being like that White Sox pitcher that while you were, playing and going toward, a big game or something that broke your hand playing too much Guitar Hero.
Yeah, but Joel Zamaya, I think it was the Tigers. Yep. They had an elbow, forearm. Yep. Trust me, that was a joke. And the worst part was I loved golf, but I got hurt playing golf in spring training in 2011 when I was the opening day starter coming into camp. And so I had to revert back to the video games because, other than that, I don't think there's ever been a documented injury that's kept somebody off the field. And that's what golf did to me. So.
Liz, I think you're the sole proprietor of most of the comments that came in over the other social media. I do have one compliment while you're digging that up, that we just have a lot of fans that are very appreciative about you coming on the show tonight and talking mental health and mental parts of the game. And I just want to throw the fact that here Joanna Gage from our YouTube awesome, loving it. So
Yeah, a lot
want
of
to make
people
sure we
had
showed that part.
a lot of people had questions about what it was like playing with Joey Bats.
Yeah, we got that one a lot.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
a real polar. Like, I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen so many questions about the same dude.
I mean, it's Joey Bats. Like, I guess we'll paint the picture. Joey Bats came over from Pittsburgh, I think in 2008, the same year I got called up. And he was kind of like I was later in my career, just a kind of journeyman bouncing around, had all this pop, just hadn't figured out how to use it. And then Dwayne Murphy at the time was a hitting coach who also helped Edwin become, the version of Edwin that we all got to see in Toronto. Joey Bats and I started off as platoon partners who would make plans to go out after the game together. So there was never that tension of, it was kind of like we just like to hang out with each other. He, from the Latin culture, he's very well versed in English. And as you guys know, he's just got a great personality, and not that the other guys don't, but it's easier to connect with somebody who speaks the language. So Joey and I became really close during that time. And then getting a chance to watch the transformation and the adjustments that he made in his swing and the way that he went about his business and the way that he studied pitchers, and everybody thought we had signs. It was because him and Edwin were just grinding in the video room all the time. So it was really cool for me to see him take that next step. And I went back to him even after I got traded and maintained, came to my wedding. I got to see him and just reconnect at his Hall of Fame induction up there in Toronto last year, which it was like, dude, I realized how deep our relationship kind of ran before this massive explosion that became Joey Bats and the career that he had. I was there for the beginning of it, and then I was in Pittsburgh. So my kids asked me, what's the bat flip, Dad? I'm like, one of the greatest moments in sports history. Like the energy, I always dreamed, right, when I came up in Toronto, like what this city would be like, what this stadium would be like if we made the playoffs. And then to get to experience in Pittsburgh, which was similar, a long time, didn't have a shot, and then to get to see the boys do it in Toronto. Ryan Goins is another good friend of mine. So getting a chance to be around Jose and see how he evolved himself as a player and as a person, and somebody I just have the utmost respect for, and one of those guys that just cares deeply about his profession, about being great at things, and somebody I leaned on later in my career to say, dude, how did you overcome all this stuff that you dealt with earlier in your career? And he was always there to pick up the phone.
That's something that I don't think that people give Jose Bautista enough credit for. Is there's a lot of talk. I mean, obviously, whenever anybody starts to rake, the first one is steroids. And I mean, there was a lot of talk about what he was doing and what he wasn't doing. And it's so refreshing to just hear somebody who was there say, this guy just put his shoulder to the rock and said, I'm going to push this thing up the hill and over the top, because it's in there. I've been there before.
Over the top.
And then to watch him evolve, just as a fan and a person who loves baseball so much, for you to listen to you talk about that, I completely was envisioning it in my mind, watching him progress to where he got. And I mean, that's something that I mean, that's a story that very few people have. And it's just so cool to hear that he just, like, for everyone out there, just grind, just get as much as you can and grind, because if you're talented enough to get there, it's in there. You got to let it out. Got to let the peacocks fly, as they say.
Yes. Just a forewarning, if any of my kids bust in, they're just getting home from school. So
mine are too.
Just as a heads up. Yeah. No, but to put a bow on it, I think when he had that like huge burst of stardom, I think that's a lot for anybody to manage. And I don't know, his reputation in the city, he better be a god there, because what he did for the city of Toronto and the organization of the Blue Jays. I've been out with him in the city, so I know how he gets treated, but just the general fan's perspective, there was no shortcuts. There was no person I saw more in the video room grinding video, watching for any type of tell a pitcher had, or situationally what he was going to do, what his best pitch was. This is before analytics now just feed you all this information. And I think watching him and Edwin go from these kind of guys, E5 when Edwin came over, and Joey Bats was just like the utility guy who had some pop but was really in and out of the zone and hit a lot of top spin line drives too. Like, oh my gosh, this dude is leg kick up to the chin. He's early. He's ready to hit every single time. And he's coming from a place of anger, not from I'm just trying to make some soft contact.
So one of the questions that I got actually is a slight spinoff, and maybe we already answered it, was you got the chance to you had two amazing coaches that are world renowned in baseball with Clint Hurdle, Cito Gaston. You played with Edwin, you played with Joey Bats, you had all the great players you had in the dugout in Pittsburgh. In the midst of all the way through your minor league career and through your major league career, was there somebody, or was it just Jose Bautista that stood out as like, oh my God, I get to play with this guy every day and he just mashes? Or to that point, throws flames if it's a pitcher?
I think the most obvious example would be Roy Halladay. Rest in peace. Another Toronto Blue Jay legend. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough winning during his time, I think, to give him that credibility that he eventually got when he went to Philly. But man, showing up to the field in spring training at 19, 20 years old and seeing this dude walking out of the weight room at 5:30 or 6 in the morning, because Aaron Seabee and I made a point to try and be the first ones to the field just as the young rookies. And this dude just walks out and looks at you. He's dripping sweat and just gives you a little grunt and walks by, and you're just like, okay, this is the show. and you know, the allure around Doc was he's a machine. And I think I can honestly tell you, I've never seen somebody more committed. Joey Bats would be a close second, but I've never seen somebody from the first day I met him to the last day I got to play with him that did not miss a beat. There was no question whether Doc was going to get his work in, and it was going to be exponentially more than the next 10 people that might be behind him chasing him. So he was somebody who really set the tone in terms of leading by example. Guys like Kevin Millar and Scott Rowland were really great about drawing out Doc's personality that just stayed behind that mask that he wore all the time. So we did get to see a little bit of the personality while he was there. But again, just somebody that I'm just grateful that I got to share a clubhouse with. I'm grateful I got to see his level of commitment and the tenacity he brought every single day to be great, which is awesome.
So is the Halladay Mile real, or is it a myth where he used to go around the 500 level and do all the laps and everything?
I can't say I saw him do that, but it wouldn't surprise me. I think I saw him more on a stationary bike because just the impact on the joints. But like, the dude was a machine, and there was no beating him to the field. There was no satisfaction of, I'm going to outwork Doc today. He just let everybody know, I'm going to run circles around you.
Hey, Travis.
And that's what he did before his workout where you saw him. That was the 4:30 workout that led to the 5:30.
Yeah.
What's your favorite home run you ever hit, and where was it? We're all about dingers on this show. Love dingers.
Yeah. I mean, first one, I saw somebody in the comments bring up the Cito mustache home run. That was really cool. We got to honor Cito.
Yep.
And I like to mess around, have a good time. So we brought, I don't know whose idea, maybe it was mine, maybe it was Vernon or Aaron. And we're like, oh, let's put the Cito mustaches on. And I'm leading off the game, right? So we go out on defense, we come back in, come to find out everybody had wiped it off their face but me. So I go up there, right? And I'm on TV, and I ended up hitting a home run. I think it was Vasquez or CC Sabathia or somebody on the Yankees. And I just remember, like, I got to be the only guy, and probably still to this day in the history of Major League Baseball, who's hit a home run with a fake mustache on. So shout out to the fan who threw that into the comments. I appreciate that memory.
That's
I think other than that, the first home run off Slowey was a big one. 2 home runs in Minnesota. This was in like April or early May of my rookie season, right? And that's where the ego really started to take off. I just went second deck twice. And I remember I show my kids the video once in a while, and you see the faces of Kevin Millar and Vernon Wells. Were like, who is this kid, right? And again, that was my potential that everybody saw, and everybody wanted to try and help me be able to do that on a regular basis. Other than that, pinch hit grand slam in Pittsburgh, I was grinding, hitting about 240 with no power, and they put me in to hit with the bases loaded. And it was actually off former Blue Jay teammate, one of my favorite teammates of mine, Sean Camp, who was my fantasy football rival for about a decade, and kind of taught me the ways of being great at fantasy football. I got a chance to torch him with a pinch hit grand slam. So I'd say those are the first ones that come to mind.
I love how you say that
had
with
a
a
friend in the
face.
comments that was at your first home run. So say he was there in person, saw your first home run. That's great.
Love it.
Yeah, you got a lot of, Travis, I'm not sure if you know or not, but you have a lot of love from the city of Toronto. I mean, as we were promoting this, and as we were talking about it, we've had lots of guys on. We had Todd Stottlemyre on, we had Jay Jackson on, and the sort of folklore that you have from just of the fun stuff you did. I mean, you left an indelible mark on the city. And I mean, that's pretty awesome for, like, I think when you hang up your hat and you're finally done and you look back and you're like, did I make an impact? I mean, you certainly made an impact in the city of Toronto.
Even your mustache. Yeah. I remember following your mustache on Facebook, like when you were playing here.
Sure, it wasn't MySpace back then.
No,
I always knew, and there was a lot of media attention. There was a lot of storylines, a lot of buildup about being a franchise player. And I wish I would have paid less attention to that stuff and more about what you guys are talking about. Later in my career, as I went back there, obviously the fans gave me a hard time when I was out in right field, because that's what hockey fans do. And that's one of the best parts about being a Blue Jays. The other team just get worn out when they get there. But through my social media posts of talking, reflecting on my career experiences, all those things, I've just felt just an incredible amount of love from Toronto and the city of Canada. And I think that's where, even though I didn't live up to what I would call my potential or expectations while I was there as a player, I'm really grateful for my relationship with the country and with the city and the organization, and getting a chance to relive those moments with you guys is awesome.
And it's, for me, selfishly, Travis, whenever, doing this for a number of years now and just being able to meet guys like you and all of the rest of it, the one thing that allows me to do is it allows me to show my 13-year-old something cool. And the mustache thing, the whole thing, like, I mean, it creates new fans for people who may not have ever seen you based on age.
Yep.
And so it's pretty cool, and I appreciate that greatly, that you were willing to come and spend some time, and it's just been awesome.
Yeah.
So on that note, seeing we are wrapping up our hour here exactly at an hour right now, we're going to give you we want to make sure we give you your chance to talk 3A athletics and anything you have going on in the shameless self-promotion plug. So Travis, go ahead, tell the Blue Jays fans and everybody listening what's up in your life.
Yeah, so started this company focused on the mental, emotional experience of playing youth sports, and that includes parents as well as coaches and the players. I know for us as parents, it's really tough to navigate this world with all the pressure and the expectations that are placed onto us as parents and placed onto our kids, and the coaches who are showing up, whether they're paid or volunteers. It's just a lot. So for us, it's really coming alongside those three groups that I mentioned. We have resources for all three groups, just to buy a parent guidebook, coach's guidebook, and the athlete's journal we talked about, from good to great. We also partner with organizations. So like you mentioned, youth baseball organizations. Not only do we bring our products in there and get them in the hands of parents, but then we run the parent and player and coach seminars to really drive home the message, what's in the book, how it's going to impact you, because these are interactive. They're not just, oh, we read this and now all of a sudden we're a little bit smarter. It's like we're actually asking parents, coaches, and players to all dive into this together and say, how can we become more self-aware? How can we utilize that information to become better versions of ourselves? And ultimately, as the adults, model that behavior for the kids. What we're asking them to do as athletes every time they show up to practice or the game. So if you're interested in getting more information, www.3athletics.com is our website. We are 3A Athletics on all social media channels. My stuff is Lunchbox Hero 45 on Twitter, and Lunchbox Hero 23 on Instagram, which you'll see a lot of the same posts on my socials. As we start to grow as a company, we'll try and funnel more of that to what we're doing on the business pages. But at this point, for me, it's just trying to help people become more aware of how difficult it is to be a kid playing youth sports, how hard it is to be a parent going through this process. And as much as there's great information out there, we feel like we're trying to tap into a little bit deeper experience for us to reflect on and figure out ways that we can get better collectively for our kids.
It's amazing. Awesome. And on that, Travis, you have a soapbox here anytime you would want. We are going to make sure that as we're clipping up stuff from this episode and everything, we're going to make sure we link all your everything for 3A Athletics and yourself the next week, just like we have been helping Jay Jackson hopefully get a couple of extra clicks on his Amazon account for his book. So make sure you all listen to that and read that too. So, and on that, so Jason, Liz, and Jason have been working on getting one of your other teammates coming on here in the last week. I think, Liz, you were the one that has been actually full on talking to him most recently. Do you want to drop the bomb on our guest here this evening and the rest of the fans listening, the 188 some odd people still listening?
I will say that I was able, through the magic of Twitter, to convince our new friend, Ricky Romero, to come on this podcast. I believe he's the one cuddling you in that photo of the walk-off. Yeah, Ricky Romero, cuddler of Travis Snider. Let's go.
Ricky knows where the bodies are buried, so be careful what you ask him.
Good deal.
So on that note, is there anything silly and fun that you would like to make sure we just give him a subtle nudge on your behalf next week or 2 weeks? He's on
Don't ask him about his hitting stats because he's going to rattle off that he's got a hit, and I think he's hitting 300, and he has the worst baseball swing I've ever seen. So ask him about his swing mechanics. But yeah, I mean, Rick is like a brother, a dad going through this right now with his kids. Just got a huge heart and a huge passion for. He married the Canadian, so he gets to spend time in Canada. I went south with my decision, but I know Rick's going to be a great interview for you guys. And as you get to see him on TV up there, I'm grateful that he's still connected because, like me, he went through a lot of stuff in his career, but came out of it a better person and somebody that I look forward to seeing and talking to every time I get the chance.
And we have him on the show on February 6th, correct, Liz?
That is correct. It is also my birthday that day. Ricky Romero is my birthday present.
Happy birthday.
Thanks, bud.
There it is. Awesome. So Travis, thank you very much. The three of us were awesome. It was so great having you on the show this evening. We really appreciate it. Great message. We love the work that you're doing with 3A Athletics. Come on anytime if you just want to connect with Blue Jays fans and just have a little piece of what was going on back when, or just, some extra mustache stories or whatever it might be.
I'll go mustache.
There we go. Yeah, next time I come on, I'll grow out the mustache.
Okay, cool. We're all in.
All right.
Except you, Liz.
Yep. So Blue Jays fans. So thank you very much for listening. That it's going to be back to us actually talking a little bit baseball Blue Jays next week before we have Ricky Romero on the 6th. So make sure you join us so we can catch up on all things Blue Jays baseball this coming season. And we're going to have some fun as always. Thank you very much again, Travis Snider, and we will all see you later. Have a great evening, everybody, and go Blue Jays.
Thank you for listening to the Jay Bird Watching Podcast. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch at BirdwatchingGC and our YouTube channel. If you want to support the show and get extra content, please consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/birdwatchinggc. Go Jays, go.
Woo!